American Express membership reward points are by far the most versatile points currency in Canada. That being said, with so many different redemption options, it's often easy to get super overwhelmed. That's what this video is for. We're going to break down every single way you can use MR points and rank them from worst to best value. I'm going to assign a target value to every single redemption to make sure you get the best value within that category. So whether you have a few points saved up already, or you're just looking to break into the MR points ecosystem, be sure to keep watching. Starting off with the worst way to use MR points by far, it's for redeeming merchandise. I'm not really sure why Amex offer this, but I know a lot of people who spend their points this way, and I do cringe a little bit when I see it every single time. Just as an example, you're going to spend 71,200 points on this cookware set that retails for $299. This will give you an average cent per point value of 0.4. This is much below anything you should be redeeming at, and I know there's a little bit of variability here, with certain merchandise giving you slightly better CPP values, but that being said, just to avoid this as much as you can, because there's a much better way to just get whatever you want with your MR points at a much better value. The next way to use your MR points are slightly better, but still not great whatsoever. It's shopping with points on Amazon or with PayPal. Now, 1,000 points equals $7 here, giving you 0.7 cents per point, which is again below that 1 cent per point benchmark we're really aiming for in the lowest case scenario. While it might be enticing to go redeem your MR points on something from Amazon, or when you have the option to shop with PayPal, you might just click that button and see, oh, you have 70 or 80,000 points saved up. You could just use your points on this, but I assure you there's a much better way to get whatever you want with your MR points at a much better value. Another way to use your MR points is with redeeming them for gift cards. There are a handful of retailers you can get gift cards for, from Cineplex to Saks Fifth Avenue, Fairmont, Indigo, or even you can get Amex prepaid gift cards. Unlike with some other programs where you get 1 cent per point or higher on gift cards, like RBC's Avion program, you do only get 0.77 cents per point here, so it's not really good value. I can't really think of a reason you'd get this, as opposed to with some of the next options that are much more versatile and will give you better value. The next option is a little bit different here. You can choose to donate your points to Save the Children through the Amex portal, with 1,000 points equaling $10. This is definitely better value than some of the other things we've seen, coming in at 1 cent per point, but something to note here is that these donations are not tax deductible, so there's not a huge benefit to doing it directly through here, instead of the next option we're just going to talk about. The best way to use your MR points for anything other than travel is by far covering your purchases with points. This is what I've been teasing for the past 4 or 5 categories, and in this you can basically redeem your points for any transaction you make on the card over $10. 1,000 points would cover a $10 purchase, making you come in at 1 cent per point, and this is the thing you should use as the very base level option. Instead of getting merchandise directly from the Amex portal, you can just go out and do that with your points. For example, that same set would cost you about 30,000 MR points, as opposed to 71,200 if you get it through the portal. This also applies for gift cards, any purchases on Amazon or PayPal, or any donations you want to make, as you're going to get that 1 cent per point baseline value. Sometimes there are bonus periods where you can redeem your points for something better than 1 cent per point. As an example, in September 2022, we saw an offer come out where you could redeem points for 1.5 cents per point. Now, I still wouldn't recommend doing this unless you really need the money, because travel is always going to be a much better alternative, but in some cases where you really just want to redeem some of your points and you're sitting on a massive stash and you want to go buy something you want, it may be a decent option. Now, moving into how to use your MR points for travel, there's really 2 main ways. The first of which is by booking through the Fixed Points Travel portal on Amex Travel. To do this, you go to Amex's site, then click Travel, then click Book Travel Online. Once this loads up, you can just log in and then pick the card you want to use to travel with. In my case, it's auto-selected my Amex Gold, and I'm just going to go with that. And then to book some flights, you just click Air, click the dates you want to go, where you want to fly, and then just hit search. Now, when you book through the Fixed Points Travel Grid, you'd be using Amex's award chart for round-trip bookings. They have a different one for both economy and business class travel, and they have a max cap price on how much you can spend on each ticket. There's also another distinction here, being that you have to be flying from Canada, but that's not really anything we really need to worry about. The main benefits here are that there are a wide range of carriers available. They tend to be a little bit more valuable for really short haul redemptions, maybe that being last minute or other things like that, because for long haul redemptions, there are still carrier surcharges that are tacked on at the end of the day, meaning you do pay a little bit more, especially when you're flying to places like Europe. If you have a lot of MR points saved up and you really want to fly business class on something that's difficult to book in Canada, such as maybe Korean Air, this is probably the best way to do it. Other than that, there's probably better options available, as you'd be getting anywhere from 1.3 to about 2 cents per point in value, which is still not incredibly great. Another thing to know here is that you'd be wanting to avoid the flexible points booking, just because it basically values your points at 1 cent per point, and you may as well be cashing them out at that rate and then just booking whatever you want directly through the airline. The next way, and the way that's the best value by far, is by transferring your points to a host of airline partners held by Amex. Since this is the best value, we're going to spend a little bit of time breaking down every single partner. First off though, getting to this page is a little bit tricky. First, you need to go view and redeem points, and then when you're here, click use points, but don't hit travel with points, instead go for transfer points, and then you'd be at the portal where you can transfer points to a lot of their partners. There's a bunch of ones here, and we're going to break down every single one. Now before we get into all of this, there's something you should definitely know before transferring over your points. You have to make sure award availability is available for the routes you want to book at that time. That's because if you just transfer your points over and you then go search to see if there's any award availability available, it won't really work out too well if there's nothing available, as now your points are stuck in a program that you may not be using for quite some time, and they'll just get devalued over time, and you'd be losing out on a lot of the flexibility with leaving points as MR points. We're also not going to be ranking all these experiences directly on cent per point values, as there's a little bit of variability, especially with things like flexibility, maybe even a little bit of personal preference at the end of the day for products that we tend to like a little bit more. Now last up on this list is transferring over to Delta SkyMiles. This used to be a really good program for short haul flights, and even potentially booking business class back in the day, but with the changes they've made to the program, it's gotten much worse. Just as an example here, with a flight from Toronto to Atlanta costing you about 25,000 SkyMiles now, or about 34,000 MR points once you consider the conversion factor, for a flight that costs about $300 or $400, you'd be getting very close to 1 cent per point and not much more. Now I'll happily say some of their products are absolutely spectacular, specifically their Delta One Suite, which is their international business class, is probably one of the best offered by North American airline. It costs you about 210,000 Delta SkyMiles, which is about 270 or 280,000 MR points, if I can do the mental math right in my head. Now you may be thinking, 270,000 points doesn't seem like the worst deal in the world for one of the best business classes in North America, and you may be right, it's different for everybody, but considering you can book that exact same flight for about $2,700 round trip in business class in the exact same seat, it may not be the best value, as you'd be getting 1 cent per point, which is almost the rate you'd be cashing out at. Next up is Etihad Airways, and it's another 1 to 0.75 transfer partner, and it's probably also not the best thing to transfer your points over to if you want to find the best value. Again, I'm going to admit they have some of the best products in the sky. You could argue that their A380 first class is probably the best product ever made for any airline. But that being said, if it costs you about 1 million miles one way if you book directly through Etihad, you're paying about $10,000 one way effectively, which isn't really too great, considering you could really just book that with cash for anything less than that. Even their business class can cost you 200, 300, 400,000 miles one way on popular routes, meaning you can't really get any good value, as there's so many better options available. If you don't like flying premium cabins anyways, even if you book economy, you'd be paying 60 to 70,000 miles one way, which would be about 100,000 MR points once you factor in the conversion, meaning if you really want to fly Etihad, there are better ways. You may want to use the fixed points travel booking we talked about earlier, or we'll talk about another way later on in the video, or you can get this for much better value if you really want to fly Etihad. Next is one of the 2 hotel partners Amex has to book with, and it's Hilton Honors. This is a 1-to-1 transfer partner, and admittedly, I don't have the most experience booking with Hilton, but they do have some really cool properties like the Waldorf Astoria or the Conrad, where you can get pretty close to 1 cent per point while still having a pretty wide property portfolio, meaning you can really book things on the lower end for a little bit cheaper, but still get that 1 cent per point, and maybe even book things on the higher end for that 1 cent per point as well. Getting back to the airline partners, the next thing we're going to talk about is Asia Miles. Now this is a 1 to 0.75 transfer partner for American Express, but it's a 1-to-1 transfer partner if you have a RBC Avion card, meaning you do avoid that 25% haircut right off the bat if you have Avion points. Now they have some really good redemption options, especially for economy class. Flying from Vancouver to Hong Kong would run you about 27,000 Asia miles, or about 36,000 MR points if you consider the conversion factor. They also have some really good business class offerings, but I personally haven't been able to have any luck finding them, as they don't really release very many seats, and they get snapped up pretty quickly by people on those popular routes. Their award chart for partners is also really good, as there's things like, for example, Royal Air Maroc that are hard to book if you're in Canada, but you can book them directly through the partner thing, but it's a little outdated, as you have to fill out a manual form and you send it over to them, and then they email you and get back to you, and you go through the whole process yourself. I haven't really had the chance to do this properly, so if you've had some experience, please let us know. Now you'd be getting about 1.4 cents per point if you travel through Asia Miles, which is pretty reasonable, but not anything super incredible even in economy. The only other MR hotel partner is next up on the list, and it's of course Marriott Bonvoy. Usually this has a 1 to 1.2 transfer ratio, but currently it's sitting at an elevated transfer ratio of 1 to 1.5. Seeing as Bonvoy points are worth about 1 cent in the base case, at least based on my experience, you'd be getting 1.2 cents per point if you transfer MR points over usually, and currently you'd be getting about 1.5 cents per point. The fact that Marriott has so much flexibility for hotels across the world is really why I rank it so high on this list. There's things on the lower end like the Moxie or the Courtyard, and things on the really high end like the St. Regis or even the Ritz-Carlton. For all the other partners above, there are probably better ways to book them if you use some other programs, but with Bonvoy, it's by far the best way to book hotels if you're looking at points. In my experience, it's a little bit pricey to be using this in North America, as a lot of people have Marriott, so the dynamic pricing tends to go a little bit higher, and it's sometimes maybe a little tricky to hit that 1 cent per point mark, but specifically in places like Europe and Asia, where not that many people have a Marriott account, it's much easier to get some more excise value, as over the summer I was traveling in Europe and I got about 1.5 cents per point on average in most of the hotel bookings I made. Additionally, hotels within the Marriott portfolio tend to be a pretty safe bet. They're all pretty clean, they're all pretty safe, and they tend to offer a pretty decent baseline experience, so it's really hard to go wrong, at least in my experience. Now we're getting into the podium places here, and in third place, it's Air France KLM, which is a 1 to 0.75 transfer partner. It's one of the best ways to fly from North America to Europe, especially if you take advantage of their promo rewards. So normally, you pay about 40,000 points and about $300 in taxes and fees when you're flying from North America to Europe if you book on a regular fare with KLM. This is basically 53,000 MR points booking from Vancouver to somewhere in Europe, which is pretty decent. You're getting about 1.4 cents per point, but if you use promo rewards, you can get a much higher value here. So what is a promo reward, you may ask? Promo rewards are basically routes that KLM and Air France set out for that specific month, where they have heavily discounted pricing if you book with points. As an example, in my case, if you want to book from Montreal to somewhere in Europe, usually you'd pay about 20,000 points one way, making it a 40,000 point flight. But if you use promo rewards right now, there's a 11,250 point promo reward from Montreal to anywhere in Europe, then anywhere in Europe back to Montreal. You need to pay about 23,000 points in total, which is much better, and you get somewhere closer to 2.4 cents per point as opposed to 1.4 cents per point. This also does work for business class, as currently that same route in business class costs you about 38,500 points one way, which is much lower than you'd be getting in a lot of other places. If you want to book something with KLM in the future, and there's not a promo reward out right now, and you live close to a major airport, it may just be worth waiting to the next month as they rotate on the first of every month, and oftentimes you can get some really good value if your trip is far enough out and you just wait to see when you get a promo reward. In terms of the experience on board, if you're looking for premium cabins, KLM has two different options available. They have a 222 on their A330 and a 121 on their 787. The hard product is a little bit different, with the seat maybe on the 787 being a little bit better as you have a little bit more privacy, but the soft product, like the food, is really good on both, and it's pretty comfy overall. Even in economy class on the A330, it's a really good ride. It's a 242 layout, which I really prefer to the 333 we see quite a bit, just because it gives you so much more space. For Air France, KLM's sister airline, they have that exact same 787 with the super diamond seat like pretty much every single other 787 carrier at this point, but again, it's a pretty standard experience from what I've heard. Moving into the top two, we chose BA to be in second place here as they're a 1-to-1 transfer partner. We noted that they're not really super strong for economy class redemptions on British Airways' own flights, as you'd be getting about 1.4 cents per point, but if you book with some of their partners, you can get closer to 2 cents per point in economy, which is really the target value we're going for in optimal circumstances. Now, British Airways' own business class and first class aren't something to really write home about, at least in my personal experience, but some of their partners' experiences are truly off the charts. We talk about this pretty much all the time, but Qatar Airways' business class, called the Q Suite, is probably the best business class in the sky, and you can book it using Avios. This is because your Qatar Airways Privilege Club account and your British Airways Avios account are interlinked if you link them yourself, and you can transfer the points freely between one or the other. Now, going back to booking with BA directly for business and first class, they have really high surcharges if you fly in and out of London, so you probably want to try avoiding that, and therefore some of their partners that don't fly into London, for example Qatar Airways, are a much better bet, as you'd be getting way over that 4 or 5 cents per point in business class if you manage to find saver rewards for about 70,000 points from Doha to Montreal or other places in North America. At the end of the day, booking with BA is pretty simple. Try not to book through BA on their own flights. Try to instead book through the BA portal on some of their partners, like maybe Cathay Pacific, American Airlines, even Qatar Airways. Or if you're booking Qatar Airways specifically, just go over to your Qatar Airways Privilege Club account and then book through there directly. In first place, I guess it's no surprise to many of you, but it's Air Canada Aeroplan. Now, if you asked me this maybe a year and a half ago, I'd be a little bit more hesitant to say Air Canada was the best way to transfer your MR points over, just because BA had so many better experiences. But over the past year, Air Canada's added some really good experiences. I'm specifically talking about booking Emirates or even Etihad first and business class, and even Singapore Airlines premium cabins directly through the Aeroplan portal. Another reason I'd say this is probably number one is because, of course, we live in Canada and Air Canada is our flag carrier, meaning there's so many more options to be able to fly and there's a little bit more flexibility. As an example, flights from North America to Europe would cost you about 40,000 points one way, which I would say is pretty good value. North America to Asia costs you about 50,000 points with their partners, and also there are no fuel charges levied on here, meaning you can get much better cent per point values as you're not paying $500 or $600 one way when booking a premium cabin. That being said, dynamic pricing is a bit of a killer here, and I understand that. Basically, how dynamic pricing works is it makes every seat available to be booked with points, but as more people book seats with points or with cash, the price for the seats go up as they would if you'd be booking a cash fare. There's a really simple way to see how much you should be paying for one of these routes. So to demonstrate how this works, I'm going to try booking a flight from Montreal to Paris for later in November. If you look here, there's an option for 56,300 points in business class on a direct flight. Even though there may not be a partner flying on this route, you can see this is a good deal by basically just seeing the distance this flies. So you can do that by going to a website called Great Circle Mapper and then putting in the two destinations you want to fly. Click distance here, and then you go click this to CDG. Calculate. You can see this is 3,442 miles. Now going over to Air Canada's award calendar, you can see anything under 4,000 miles should be costing about 60,000 points on a partner. And in most cases it would cost anywhere from 60,000 to 160,000 points booking directly through Air Canada. Now we got really lucky here and we found something on the lowest end of the dynamic pricing band, even lower than that 60,000 point benchmark they've had set out. So this is probably a very good deal. Now in another case, maybe you're looking to fly from Toronto to Zurich. This is about 70,000 points as it's just over 4,000 miles if you book on a partner, but through dynamic pricing we've often seen prices about 290,000 points one way, and that's obviously not optimal value because the difference in quality on the two seats is not really worth 220,000 points going one way. So you can basically use this as a general guideline. Of course, if you really want to fly business class and you have millions of points saved up, then yeah, maybe go spend 280,000 points just to fly one way because that's something you really want to do. But I just use it as a guideline to see maybe this is not the best value and instead I could just fly economy on this route and maybe fly business class on another route where I'd be getting close to that partner award pricing or anywhere just closer to what I think is good value. That's really why I think Air Canada ends up being the best transfer partner here. And while I wouldn't just transfer points over blindly to it as opposed to just leaving them as MR points, if you were to do that and there was a bonus, I wouldn't think that's the worst decision in the entire world, just because Air Canada points tend to be fairly flexible over the long term. So as we wrap up this video, let's just take another look at a lot of the redemption options we have. For the first 3 or 4, anything less than the cash value of 1 cent per point, I would probably like to avoid, just because if you can cash stuff out at 1 cent per point, why use it to buy merchandise or buy gift cards when there's just a better baseline option available when you can do the exact same thing by just cashing them out. Now certainly, cashing points out is not the best value on paper, as you are leaving a lot of value on the table, but in certain circumstances, it may be worth it. For example, if you got a travel card quite some time ago and you racked up a bunch of points and you're able to travel a little bit, but you don't have any travel plans in the future and you're sitting on this massive nest egg of points, it may be worth cashing them out if you see a 1 to 1.5 bonus or even at 1 cent per point. If there's something else you really want to buy and you have no plans to travel in the future. This is because points do devalue over time and you don't really know what 500,000 points are going to be worth in 5 or 10 years. Maybe down the road, Air Canada or KLM or any number of other partners end up devaluing what their points currencies are worth. As this does happen regularly, I would say every couple of years, you do see a 5 or 10% devaluation. It's something you should keep in mind, and if you want to really buy something and you have a lot of points, you may as well just cash them out and do that instead. For all other cases, I would probably hold on to the points and either use them through the fixed points travel portal, which I would say is really good value or pretty decent value when you're booking something last minute, or you're trying to book something that you can't otherwise book with many of the partners available in Canada, like we talked about Korean Air, for example. But otherwise, I would just say you should transfer the points to a different partner. I understand that it's a bit more high risk, high reward, but if you really want to find the best value, I would say that's the best way to do it. Even something like Air Canada, it's pretty easy to find decent value, at least more value than me getting by booking directly to the fixed points portal, so maybe I would consider just transferring your points over to that if you have no real other option. With that, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. We do hope that you learned quite a bit, and if you have any questions, be sure to let us know in the comments below. With that, we'll see you next week. Take care.